Welcome back to ZA Confidential, and today in a slightly different format where you can actually see how ugly we all are, we're having a discussion on not just the lockdown, which has been a blight on the lives of many South Africans, but also what you can do if you can't get hold of real beer or wine. What we're doing is we're going to taste something that I've seen increasingly on the shelves of our supermarkets in South Africa, which is de-alcoholized wine, and we'll also be tasting a beer. The aim of this is to see whether they are in themselves enjoyable, whether after the lockdown is lifted, and at the time of talking, it could be within the next 48 hours or so, and whether these are sustainable, whether they're enjoyable, whether you might be better off just having a glass of water. But before we go into our tasting, let's just get some idea from our panel on what the lockdown is doing to us all. And I suppose it's time I introduced our panel. We have two of our most notorious economists, Chris Hart and Mike Schuessler. We have business consultant, Dwayne Newman. We have the head of Gumtree Auto in South Africa, Jeff Osborne. We have Michael Olivier, who of course is our food and wine guru, always will be, as long as we're all around, and who will be leading us in the tasting. And as always, last but not least, we have Malcolm McDonald, who will be handling the technical side of this, but also telling us what he thinks of it all. Okay, so just to kick off the discussion, I know, Mike Schuessler, from watching you on social media, that you have been organizing a campaign to try to get the lockdown lifted. How much harm is it doing to our country?
Well, a lot. You know, if I look at the manufacturing in South Africa in the second quarter, of all the big, large economies, both emerging and developed, that I could get, we had the third worst outcome, which gives you a very good indication. We've seen the same with mining. There's not that many countries around the world that have mining. It's certainly going to hit the unemployment numbers negatively. We're going to see more people unemployed. Already doing work for the company I do, Banks of Africa, I do work for. We could see roughly about 20% of the people in the formal sector did not receive a paycheck. It doesn't mean they're unemployed. It means that they may just temporarily not have money, or there's another way that the UIF got to them because they don't necessarily go through the same system then. But that's 1 in 5. Now, if we assume that the government guys are okay, and they're about 21% of the workforce, but they're about 30% of our pay thing, then we know it's around 27, 28% of the formal sector that's probably been made, well, they didn't get an income. And I don't know how many of them have lost their jobs, and I don't know how many are just temporary, but it's a huge number. It's a shocking number. What's keeping up retail sales at the moment is about the UIF channeling 12 billion a month into the economy, a further 9 billion in extra SASSA grants coming in, and people, I think, accessing some of their savings. We've heard insurance claims going up. One of the things I think that will come a bit clearer on this is when we get the labor force survey, which has now been delayed because they changed methodology to a computer-aided telephone call rather than in person because of the COVID story. But that means that you're looking at a very different picture on how to do it. So they're struggling. I don't have inside information as to exactly what's happening, but I do know that they're having to redo their methodology a bit to bring it in line. So whatever is going to happen, it's going to be an interesting number, probably a shocking one. And as Chris Hart and Dwayne and everybody else will tell you, employment is not a leading indicator. It's actually a lagging indicator. You first get the jobs stay, and then the guy doesn't have money And only when he doesn't have money does he let people go, because people don't like losing people. That's what it is. So
okay, well,
we're not sure how bad it's going to be, but I'd say that it's very bad.
Okay, well, let's just hear from Chris Hart. On the other hand, do you agree with anything Mike has said?
Mike was actually quite polite. We were in recession before this lockdown. We literally been plunged from recession into depression. Before the lockdown, it's 10 to 12 million people needed jobs against 16 million who had jobs. And as Mike says, one doesn't know exactly how many have lost their jobs. But certainly the indication could be 3 million plus that have lost their jobs. This government that didn't know how to create jobs beforehand certainly has no clue on how to recreate the jobs that have been lost. The people that have been unaffected completely have been receiving their salaries. No job losses at all have been the civil servants, which means that the actual pressure on the overall balance in the economy in terms of state wage bill, which was already pushing us towards into junk and deeper into junk, has now just exploded. We're literally being plunged towards a reckoning with the IMF. I know we've already taken a loan with the IMF, but we're going to go into crisis when we go into to the IMF, and we've got policy being doubled down, right, in terms of destruction. Everybody says we have to have reform, but when the government says reform, it actually means reform towards the hard left, towards central planning and central control of the economy, which is making our country more and more uninvestable. And so for the private sector that has been weakened enormously, right, we're going to be allowed to go back to business on their terms under central control, and we are going to see a further hemorrhage of investment out of the economy. So we're going to be into depression, and that depression is going to last a long time, right? Let's call it a Y-shaped recovery. In other words, maybe a little bit of a rebound when the shutdown happens, but then the Y comes in where we get plunged towards the actual IMF as a country in crisis, uninvestable, without any access to credit anywhere in the world except the IMF.
Okay, Dwayne, you are really at the coalface of this in the sense that you advise a lot of companies on investment and all sorts of other ways of trying to keep their businesses afloat during the current problems. What's your assessment? Are we really in a deep hole at the moment?
Hi, John. Yeah, I mean, I've been helping a lot of clients access this TERS incentive out of the UIF, and that's a program for obviously employed people. So, I mean, fundamentally, I mean, it's a good program. I mean, fundamentally, that would be saying try and keep people employed, and government will be paying the money. Obviously, it's nowhere near what their income loss is. I mean, that's really the big challenge. But the real issue for me is that big corporates, I mean, most of my clients are really large corporates. They're running out of cash, okay, so they thought, no, at the beginning of the lockdown, no, we'll see it through. We've got really strong balance sheets, okay, and they'll better see it through. The problem is the lockdown has been much longer than anticipated, okay, so and now they're going through retrenchments. And for large corporates to retrench people, it really needs a really strong push for them to do that, okay, so. And are they going to re-employ them when the lockdown's over? Unlikely. Okay, they're resizing their companies. Okay? And so some of it is they probably should have resized them already back down to the economy was slow. So I think it's going to take a long time for those people who are becoming unemployed to get re-employed. And it's from professional services firms, big corporates. Obviously, the SMEs have been decimated because they had the receiving end. So if they haven't re-engineered their businesses, they're out of business, and those jobs are going to take a while to come back into the economy.
Okay, well, Jeff, you're in a retail environment in the sense that a lot of online activity is taking place. To what extent do you think that this current crisis is going to see a revolution in retailing in South Africa, because we've been lagging behind the rest of the world in online purchasing. Certainly those who are stuck at home don't have much choice, but even those who can get out appear to be buying a bit more online. What's your current assessment of the market?
Well, I think, yeah, John, if I may just commence by saying that the motor industry has certainly been profoundly affected by this. And fair to say, it always has been a sound barometer of the state of the economy. I mean, if you just quickly reflect upon it, April, to all intents and purposes, they sold nothing. 98.4% of cars were sold through the Naamsa numbers. And then it recovered in May to 67%, and that looked promising. June was 36%, and now July, 36% again. So it's flattened out, which is very concerning. And in dialogue with the banks, the narrative I'm hearing is that there's no shortage of applications and all happening online. In fact, the online activity, understandably, has increased, not only in our platform, but also from a credit application perspective. But the decline rate has gone up quite profoundly. So I'm afraid reality has kicked in. The banks very quick to say, talk to us, you know, if you're in trouble, come and chat. But the minute you do that, then the credit rating changes. So there are many prospective buyers who had started the process prior to this pandemic, who had in fact qualified and now are no longer in that position. But on a broad perspective, to answer your question in terms of online interacting and purchasing globally, and as you know, we're part of, at the moment, in any event, we're part of eBay. And not surprisingly, this has tended to accelerate the practice of purchasing online everywhere in the world. And we've seen it here as well. The number of visits to our site, the number of listings has gone up. Although we are not an e-commerce site in the sense that you can't actually buy and sell on Gumtree, but you can, it's advertising, it's classified online advertising. But I do understand, and not surprisingly, that all of the sites, particularly the e-commerce sites, Amazon and others, eBay included, are having record levels of activity. So it's the new way forward, as is this Zoom, it would appear. This ain't over yet. So I think we need to just accept the inevitable going forward. It's going to change and continue to do so.
Okay, well, Malcolm, following on from what Jeff was saying, you have set up this discussion, and it's the first ZA Confidential podcast we'll be doing via Zoom. I suppose it must be the case that with social distancing, with people being barred from moving from one province to another in South Africa, and business people being barred from moving from one country to another in many cases, the electronic communication, people working from home rather than from their office in many cases, is again revolutionizing the way we do business. Do you think this is permanent?
But I think some businesses have had to reinvent themselves in order to cope with the lockdown, and I don't think they're going to turn back. I think that if they found a successful formula during the lockdown, that would have been primarily based on a digital platform or some new digital way of doing their business, that it's very unlikely they would turn back, because they've effectively exposed themselves to an international market which previously they might not have been able to access.
Okay, well, let's move onto the issue of wine, which is the reason we're all gathered here today, wine and beer. Michael Olivier, one gets the impression that given that there is this stupid banning, this prohibition of wine sales, plus problems with tobacco as well, although there are leaks in the system, teapots being used to serve wine in a wonderfully speakeasy way in some of South Africa's restaurants, the industry has been clobbered. Now you're in close contact with the world of food and wine. What sort of sentiment are you detecting? Is it despair? Is it hope that the businesses could be saved if the lockdown is lifted?
Well, I think it's despair and hope, really. I know that when we come through this, whenever that may be, we will have lost a number of suppliers, a number of wine producers. Already I hear stories of vineyards being pulled out, of plums being planted in their stead. I hear stories of the bigger companies saying to producers, thank you very much, but we won't be buying anything from you next year because all our tanks are full. I think there are a few people who have done things right. I think the old family farms, I think, will survive simply because they've worked at it for so long, and most of them are so proficient at sales and marketing. But it's going to be a very interesting, very different world out there, you know, over the next year or so. I also hear a number of craft brewers closing down, and this, I think, ultimately will lead to the craft gin makers, perhaps the brandy distillers, simply shutting down. Whiskey seems to be, South African made whiskey seems to be strong. But of course, you know, it's been however many months that nobody's been able to sell anything. A couple of the wine producers, I had a newsletter from one of them yesterday saying, well, you know, thank you very much for your support, but we export most of our wines anyway, so we're fine. So it's a very interesting setup, the whole thing. I think we're going to lose a lot of names that we sort of thought of as they're here with us forever, kind of thing.
Okay, Michael, but also it's not just the wine industry, it's not just the restaurant industry which have been clobbered. There's a very strong link, particularly in the Cape, between wine and tourism and gastronomy.
Yes.
Presumably it will take quite a while for that to be rebuilt, or do you think people are just queuing up to get on those big planes and come to the Cape and get back to tasting again?
I would like to think that there are. I know that a lot of the wineries are being very clever, Spear being one of them, where they will have wine, have food ready for you. De Grendel is offering picnics on their lawns. They'll also deliver hot and frozen meals within a certain delivery area. Quite a number of people are doing that. Restaurants up here as well are started off with the home delivery thing when lockdown came along, and have now reopened, but they're still doing their deliveries. So I think those are the people who are really, you know, trying to keep their businesses going. The big ones like Marble and Saint are opening now in September. One of our favorite restaurants, DW 1113, still doing deliveries, yet they're now open to diners as well.
Okay. By the way, you said here, just to clarify things, you're sitting with a backdrop of nice-looking Cape, but you are actually up in Joburg at the moment, aren't you, Michael?
In leafy Linden, yes.
Leafy Linden. Okay, well, now we go on to our tastings, and what we're going to taste first is beer. It is a beer without alcohol, which for me is a rather strange combination, or lack of combination. It's called Devil's Peak Hero. Before we actually get down to slurping, Michael, tell us about it.
Well, Devil's Peak, they have 3 non-alcoholic beers. This is the Hero is the original one. Then they have one which is called A Twist of Citrus, which I suspect is more sort of orange based, and then they have a lemon one as well. Now, the manufacture of non-alcoholic beer and wine differ slightly. For beer, the way to remove the alcohol is to put it into a vacuum, heat it up, which of course affects the flavor. Heat it up, the alcohol then it evaporates off, and then they take that alcohol and water, they take the alcohol out, they put the water back, and so there you have de-alcoholized beer. The one thing, I've been to Devil's Peak, and I know JC Stanley, the brewer there, and he's very, very competent. And I think with the Hero, certainly for me, he's made a very passable beer. I think the hops that he has used are sort of nice and crisp. There's good sort of fruit aroma coming off the beer. It's very pleasant nose, and a nice palate too. Very delicate. I keep on sort of thinking of sort of lychee kiwi, putting such a face. I keep thinking of kiwi, lychee, that kind of fruitiness. I would think this was a beer that you have at midday. It's a beer I think would go quite nicely with food, particularly the more sort of delicately flavored foods like smoked chicken or smoked fish or something like that. And also perhaps a beer that you could simply carry on drinking during the afternoon and into the evening.
Well, Michael, I had a sip of this while you were talking, and I'm not sure I'm sold on this one. You mention all this fruitiness and so on, but I don't normally expect or want a lot of fruit in my beer. Yeah. I want it to taste of beer. To me, it was a bit insipid, very, very light. I can understand that maybe there is a future for these beers even after the lockdown, with people facing very stringent drink drive problems. Yeah, maybe for a designated driver, this is about the best you're going to get. But would I rush out and buy it again? Probably not. Michael McDonald, what do you think?
So as someone who's, I enjoy my craft beers and I enjoy interesting and different flavors in my beers, I don't think this is terrible, but it is very light, as you said. So I'd certainly think it's worth drinking if you're intending to go out and drive afterwards. Is to keep some of this handy or use this if you're going to be going out and driving home. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with this. It's quite friendly, very fruity, as you said. But yeah, not in any way offensive, I'd say.
Inoffensive, Jeff Osborne, is that good enough?
Actually, this is surprisingly not bad at all. I mean, it certainly looks like a real beer, and it pours with a very good head and so on. But I find a very strong malty nose and flavor to it, which for me is not unpleasant. And I too like craft beers, and I far prefer to have a malty taste as opposed to a yeasty taste, which kind of typifies so many of those craft beers. So, you know, I could drink this. It wouldn't be my first choice. I'd certainly rather have a real beer. But a thought struck me, and maybe Malcolm could give some, Michael could give us a thought on this. I'm sort of fairly partial, believe it or not, to the odd shandy, which is very thirst quenching. So a bit of lemonade and beer. And I'm just wondering if this mightn't lend itself to the creation of a different shandy, where you could have half real beer, like Carling, or one of the good Windhoek beers, and add some of this. It might be quite pleasant.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you completely. Yeah, I'm very fond of this. I don't like those really hearty, full beers. Funny enough, I'm very fond of Guinness, but for me, this is just so delicate and lovely, fruity, aromatic, and I think certainly, Jeff, it would make for a good 50-50 shandy.
Dwayne, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it doesn't actually taste like a beer. I mean, when Michael was describing it, it tastes like a lychee drink. So yeah, that's probably my initial impression. I mean, I find beers, most beers are much more bitter than this. Okay, this does very much have a much more of a fruity aftertaste than I suppose we say a normal beer. I mean, I suppose this is a normal beer, just no alcohol in it. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, actually, when I was out this morning after our run, we had breakfast, and Bruce, my running buddy, he had this at breakfast, okay, because you can, right? Okay. So he had his nice full breakfast with his beer, and he seemed to thoroughly enjoy it. But yeah, so I think it's too leachy for me, to be really honest, John.
Okay, well, of course, Dwayne, those of us with a bit of class have champagne with our breakfast, but I don't want to...
We can't afford it anymore, John, I'm sorry.
Chris Hart, what do you make of it?
Yeah, my first impression was it is more shandy-like. In other words, it's got the sweetness and you know, more of a shandy. In other words, it's a cold drink with a beer flavour type of thing. And normally I'm very suspicious with these things that are processed. It's like decaffeinated coffee, which I find absolutely awful. And that sort of thing. In other words, you take the real stuff out of it. But as a drink, it's very nice, as long as you're not expecting a full-bodied beer. If you're expecting a shandy, and I like the idea of mixing this with the real beer as a shandy, it certainly, I think, would be very nice. But on its own, I actually also was pleasantly surprised as a drinkable drink, but I really think you've got to drink it without the mindset that this is a beer. It's just a beer-flavored cold drink, and that's what it is.
Mike Schuster, I know that you've said in the past, Mike, that real men shouldn't drink rosé wine. What do you think about real men drinking beer with no alcohol?
Well, I'd like to say I did change my view on rosé. I'm not sure if I'll change my view, however, on the beer. The beer is fruity, as Dwayne said, and as Michael said, and it doesn't really taste then like a beer. I do like Jeffrey's idea and everybody else's idea of that you mix it with a real beer if you're the designated driver or something like that. It's not bad. It's really drinkable. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's not beer. I don't know how to say it otherwise. It's just not beer.
Okay, and just one final thought before we move on to the wine. Maybe if you want your kids to feel really grown up, but you don't want to get them pissed, it might be worth serving this at a special occasion, so that your 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 20-year-old can have something that looks a bit like an adult drink, but is not going to have the side effects of an adult drink. Does anyone support that view, or am I just being...
My 11-year-old daughter, John, in fact, tried this last night, and she said she far prefers Castle.
Well, there's an
Father of the Year award,
John, was thinking, are you talking about cider effects there? Or
Well, I think we'll put a cork in that one, Chris. And Michael Olivier, we are now going to try two wines. The first is a white wine, which hopefully everyone will have got hold of. I think we all have a specimen of this. Again, it's de-alcoholized. Those of us who can afford it would buy it from Woolworths, the South African supermarket chain. I found it a bit overpriced at around 60 Rand, because in the old days you could buy a drinkable bottle of white wine for a little bit less than that. But obviously the real criteria is whether or not it's an enjoyable drink. Michael Olivier, tell us about it.
John, yeah, look, this is a Chenin Blanc. It's made by a chap called Reg Holder, who specializes in making non-alcoholic wines. And this is made especially for Woolworths. Do we want to talk about the de-alcoholization process, or do we want to talk about the wine?
I think you do. I think you're raring to talk about.
Good. Well, the de-alcoholization process, you know, they say that the wines are produced in the normal standard winemaking procedures, which of course they're not, because the alcohol is removed. And the alcohol is removed by the use of what they call spinning cone technology. It's a machine. It has 40 cones in it. They spin. They remove all the aromas, the flavors, and set those aside. They then take what is left, which is colored water and alcohol, and they then remove the alcohol from that. They then replace the distillate, the fruit and the aroma and everything, so that essentially all that has happened is that the alcohol has been removed, and that's done in two passes. First, to remove the fruity and the aromas and everything. Secondly, to remove the alcohol. So you're left with a wine. I think the color's good. I really, really like the nose. I think it's got the sort of Chenin-y things that you're looking for. There's lots of green apple there. There's sort of nice tropical fruit, and there's a sort of I don't want to say sweetness because it's not sweet, but there's a fruity sweetness which goes right through. Very Granny Smith. My feeling is that just at the end, you sort of waiting for something more to happen, and it's not happening because I think the alcohol adds so much to the mouthfeel. But as a glass of wine, middle of the day, I think it's fine. Would be great, maybe with some soda and lots of ice. It's not a wine that I'm going to be drinking once lockdown is over.
Okay, Michael, but before we go to our other guests, could I just ask you about cooking with wine? Because obviously, as I've found during this lockdown period, so many recipes require a bit of booze in them, either red or white wine, some with cider, some with brandy, port, sherry. If you're doing Chinese, you either put in sherry or rice wine. That alcohol plays a vital and integral part in cooking. Do you think that by using one of these de-alcoholized wines, you could substitute and get an acceptable dish if you're cooking?
Yeah, look, I haven't cooked with de-alcoholized wine. Essentially what the cooking does with conventional wine is it takes the alcohol out, because the alcohol, of course, boils off at a lower temperature than maybe the sauce in the dish itself. It's not something that I would think, oh yes, this is a dish for the de-alcoholized wine. I would never use de-alcoholized wine in cooking.
Okay, well, that pretty much sums up my feeling. Although I have, when I made a bolognese, I put a bit of de-alcoholized wine in it, and it tasted okay.
Yeah.
But obviously there was no benchmark to compare it against, because I haven't cooked something with proper wine for a while. It is far too precious, and even if you buy it on the black market, it's damn expensive. So I'm not going to pour that into a cookpot. Okay, well let's get some more views on this. My own view is, I think the nose is excellent. I think it's a very pleasant drink, but as I think you hinted, Michael, there's something missing, and that must be the mouthfeel that you get with a bit of alcohol. This to me is not a glass of wine. It is far closer to a glass of grape juice, and while that's not a terrible thing, I think we're being asked to pay over the limit for something that is an inferior product. It's okay in its place, but its place is not in my wine cellar. Michael,
I think, sorry, John. Obviously, the price depends on the cost of removing the alcohol as well.
Okay, Dwayne, you weren't wildly impressed with the beer. What do you make of this wine?
I think there's something missing, right? Okay. I'm not sure what it is. Let me think. So I think it's. Yeah, so I think when you appreciating wine. So Does it have a nice nose, as Michael was explaining? I think the answer is yes. Did I enjoy it as a drink? The answer was yes. I enjoyed it actually much more than the beer. Okay? But there's something missing that you get with a wine which lingers. Okay, I don't find this lingers. Okay, on my palate. Okay, and I think that probably gets back down to your point, John. It nearly seems like a grape juice, because grape juices don't linger. I think wine lingers, and that's what gives me my enjoyment of the wine. So it's taking the alcohol out, but it's also taking my enjoyment of the drink as well.
Mike Schussler?
I don't know what to make of it. I agree, it's got a nose. I agree, it tastes. I don't know what the difference is. It's probably a slight step up from grape juice, but it's not really. It doesn't come through, and I don't know if it even tastes like a Chenin Blanc to me. Chenin Blanc's got a soury aftertaste sort of thing, and this doesn't have it, in my opinion. No.
Our second economist, Chris Hart, have they been economical with the alcohol and done a bit of damage to this wine?
Well, I think I'll describe my mindset as trying to taste this as a wine, right? It's soft on the palate, etc., and that's it. It goes away very quickly. There's the nose and all the rest of it. I think when Michael says, a bit like Granny Smith, if I could say I'm now given this put in front of me and I'm not told it's wine, my thought is flat appetizer, right? In other words, that's exactly how it tastes, as appetizer that's flat, right? But it's still quite nice, right? But I didn't get more out of it than that. And, to my mind, I'd just have an appetizer with the fizz. So yes, if you're going to put this with something, you put it with the soda so that you can put a little bit of, sparkle in it. But it is nice and soft, and it is drinkable. But that is my impression, certainly.
Yeah, well, I think if it were me, I'd put a bit of gin in it. But
Yes.
maybe that is heresy. Malcolm?
So I partly agree. I think appetizer or a white grape tizer would be a more enjoyable drink as a drink. And then as a wine, this doesn't even contend.
No.
So it's a very, very nice grape apple juice blend. It's a very sophisticated grape apple juice blend, I would have to say. But it's a soft drink, and if you had to compare it to appetizer or grape tizer, I think they're better. So I don't see a place for it really. I think appetizer, grape tizer, nicer to drink. If you really want a sophisticated grape juice, I wouldn't still be paying 60 Rand for it. I think that's a lot for a grape juice.
Yeah.
Jeff, what did your daughter make of this, or wasn't she allowed?
Yeah, well, in fact, yeah, she was part of, and as I confessed earlier, I tried them all last night. And my first impression is certainly the nose is what one would expect, perhaps from a Chenin, in as much as very fruity and complex. But the minute it hits your palate, I agree. To me, it's not even grape juice. I'm with Chris on this one. This is apple cider gone wrong. And I found it overwhelmingly sweet, quite frankly. To me, it's very, very sweet indeed. And I don't have a particular sweet tooth, not for this type of thing. I like chocolate, but not this. But John, interesting comment you made. What I tried last night, and it was surprisingly not bad, and it certainly uplifted my mood and the rest of the evening, and my daughter's. I put some vodka in it. It was actually quite a pleasant drink. But would I buy it again? I agree the price it's expensive. I accept it. Probably it's a costly process. But out of choice, I wouldn't have this on my table ever again.
Well, I think we're pretty agreed that it's not unpleasant as a drink, but wine it ain't. Well, let's go on to the red. We also, most of us, I know two of us had a bit of problems in sourcing all the wines, because due to this lockdown problem, we're having to do this tasting in many different locations, as opposed to the camaraderie of huddled around a microphone and seeing one another face to face in a proper way. But Michael Olivier, tell us about this red. It says it's a savvy red if non-spectacled eyes are working.
John, yes, it's called Lautus. Lautus, of course, is a Latin word meaning pure, elegant, and sumptuous. It's a blend of Shiraz, Cabernet Sauvignon Pinotage, which they have picked earlier to retain the acidity, and some of it, of course, picked at optimal ripeness as well. Winemaking processes are exactly for a traditional red wine. They allow the fermentation to take place in upright fermenters with pump overs twice a day, and those pump overs remove the flavors and the gentle tannins, etc. Then the wine goes into oak barrels for 9 to 12 months, and then they take it then through the second fermentation, which is through the second process, which is the de-alcoholization using the spinning cone. So what we have here is a wine. I think the nose I think is good. There's a nice sort of blackberry plum foundation there. The oak comes through quite nicely. I would imagine he probably used previous fill oak, so that the oak really is in support of the fruit on the nose. But I think when you get it in your mouth, it sort of disappears. And there's nothing there. There's for me, none of that sort of bright, I want to say sweet, but of course it's the wrong word, that sort of bright fruit, nice supportive oak, good acidity. Those things are there in a flashing moment. Interesting that this is made by the same person who made the Woolworths Dialc Chenin Blanc we tasted just now. So for me, I don't know, pour it into a jug of chopped up fruit and add some ginger ale and a shot of brandy and have a sangria.
Well, Michael, I'm delighted because I can disagree with you for once. For my money, this is the best thing that we have tasted in this tasting. I think the nose is excellent. Really doesn't smell like a de-alcoholized wine. And although you're right, it doesn't linger in the mouth. My initial sensation is that, yeah, this is pretty close to a good blended wine. Would I be very keen to buy it under other circumstances? Well, under the designated driver scenario, I think I would. I'm enjoying this more than any of the others, and congratulations. I will drink to this winemaker. I think he's done a damn good job. Dwayne Newman.
Yeah, John, I think I agree with you. I think of the drinks we've tasted today, I think it's the closest one to a wine. I agree with Michael, it doesn't linger, okay? Like a good complex wine would, but it tastes the closest to a wine compared to the others. The others are more just fruity drinks. Okay? So as a de-alcoholized wine, I think I think it's a good job. Do I still prefer wine with alcohol in it? The answer is definitely yes, because it still lingers, and this definitely does not. But I think of the ones we've tasted, this is the best one we've tasted today.
Remind me, Chris Hart, were you able to get a sample of this?
No, not really. It was a
Not
pity.
really.
The Woolworths that I was at, that was the waterfront, so it's a well-stocked Woolworths, did not have it. So I was a bit disappointed, and I didn't have time
Do you
to
think,
get.
Chris, this might be an indication that this is actually
On demand.
not a bad wine substitute, and therefore they're staying out of it?
No, I suspect that if when the ban is lifted, that a lot of this will end up as surplus stock to be sold off much cheaper to avoid the expiry date problem, and that's how I suspect it'll be. Because I think most people who are wine drinkers would want the real thing. As I said, it's like decaffeinated coffee. You've really got to struggle to enjoy that.
Mike, just to remind me, did you manage to get this red?
Yes, at the third Woolworths, I found it. And that says something to me. I agree with you, John. It's the most interesting and drinkable of all the non-alcoholic drinks we've had. And I think why Chris and I took 3 attempts to get it are not finding this is it's popular. People like it. It tastes the most like wine of all the things that we've had. And maybe, if you have this and you're sitting outside a Brian just talking and not expecting to have too good a wine, but you just want the feeling of a wine or something like that, then I think this pretty much does the trick. I think it does the trick better than the appetizer type grape juice that we had. I got a feeling it lingers maybe a second or two longer than the Chenin Blanc, and I agree with you. For the first time, I think we've got something here that works. I don't know if it will sell afterwards, but I'm impressed. Let's put it that way. Wouldn't buy it maybe in natural circumstances, but it's something, if you've got somebody over that doesn't drink, or you're the designated driver, maybe.
Malcolm, you're a red wine buff. Is this going to be forming an integral part of your cellar post-lockdown?
There is absolutely zero chance of that. This is certainly not. I certainly am not as optimistic about it as anyone who's come before me has been. I think that the initial nose is light, but it's there. The initial flavor in the mouth, the first moment, is actually quite nice, and then it turns very suddenly to a nasty aftertaste, in my opinion. Yeah, it's quite soft and light, very, very almost ephemeral flavor. It just disappears. But that aftertaste, and I'm pleased to know that it's not a chemical a process that they use to remove the alcohol, that it's rather a mechanical process to remove the alcohol, which sounds like to me. Yeah. But that aftertaste is almost what I would have thought of if they'd used some chemical to remove the alcohol is what that aftertaste gives me. Yeah, no, not a fan. I'd rather drink grape juice.
Okay, well, Jeff, what's the multi-generational verdict on this?
Yeah, I'm pretty much aligned with the popular sentiment that it's as close as getting to a wine of what we've tasted today. But I agree with Malcolm. The first few sips are kind of okay, but then a most awful aftertaste does develop, manifest in my mouth. To the extent that I find the more I drink it, the worse it gets. I think what's intriguing for me throughout this exercise is that I've always assumed, clearly incorrectly, so that the alcohol simply, its predominant presence provides for some level of inebriation if you have enough of it. But there's no doubt about it, there's more to the alcohol than that. It certainly does enhance the flavor profoundly. It changes the whole character and body of what we drink. It's not just the alcohol effect. But long may soon that they lift the restrictions, because I certainly couldn't become addicted to this, I'm afraid.
Sounds like sour grapes to me, Jeff. Okay, well, unfortunately, or fortunately, we're coming to the end of our tasting discussion. But I think I'd love to go round our guests with just one question, which is what they'll buy first thing after they're allowed to buy alcohol again. The lockdown at some stage has to be lifted because of the horrors it's doing to the economy in terms of lost tax revenue, plus a lot of misery, particularly in my household. But what will we rush out to buy the minute we're allowed to rush out and buy something? Jeff?
I certainly propose going out and getting myself a few good reds. Which ones I'll choose precisely, I think will probably depend on some of my past experience and the price, because my concern is that we're not going to find the prices as reasonable as they were perhaps before. I might be wrong, but that'll certainly influence me, John. I think, we have so many fine wines out there, and I'd like to get at least 6 good red, Pinotage, Merlot, and a few others, and certainly a Chenin Blanc and a Sauvignon Blanc. But it'll depend on the prices. I'll be looking for value for money.
Malcolm?
Sure. Craft beers, a Jack Black or a Steph Weiss, something like that. My wine cellar hasn't been depleted yet, so I'm still in a lucky position where I'm enjoying good wine still. So not in a rush, but I have to say of these, the Devil's Peak is my favorite. But a nice craft beer, I think. I've been craving that.
Dwayne?
Yeah, I'll probably be going out to buy some good solid Merlot. My favorite, even though I've got 1 or 2 bottles left, it's getting really low. I'm not as lucky as Malcolm. I've got a really well-stocked cellar. My cellar's too small. Yeah, so probably a Meerless Merlot, one of my favorite wines, just for a special occasion. Because I think when you don't have something, I think you appreciate it much more when things have been taken away from you. I know we were out for dinner the other night. It was my wife's birthday, and obviously a great restaurant. But sitting down to have a meal without a good bottle of wine, it's just not the same. So I'm really longing to have not just the alcohol, but having a good meal with the alcohol. It makes a difference, John.
It's a shame you couldn't order a pot of tea, Dwayne. Mr. Schussler?
I'm going to do the same as Jeff. I'm going to go out and get myself a few good reds. Probably some nice Cape mixtures like a non-Cop Cadet, depending on what it costs. I think, what's it called? Osblut Rodeberg thing. I think Rupert and Rothschild Classique, something in those sort of lines. And then a nice Pinotage, maybe a Sonnenblom Pinotage, which I think is a very good one in my mind. I really want my red wine back. I am out of red wine. I've been having a sip of brandy with a bit of Coke every night, just before bedtime, and I'm very angry. And that's why I helped start End Lockdown group, and we're serious. We're getting a good lot of traction. So hopefully we can end it, and we mean end it. We don't mean, you can just not travel anymore. We mean get it over and done with. We've seen the examples, Uruguay, Sweden, whatever you want. They didn't lock down. They're no worse than anybody else. Really, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, they've all got it sorted. We followed the sheep.
Well, at least we didn't follow Donald Trump, or maybe we did. Chris Hart.
Oh, Orange Man bad.
Yes, my sense of thing. Firstly, let's not kid ourselves. What we've had today are cold drinks, all right, and you're trying to get in a mindset of okay, this is a wine or a beer, etc. They are cold drinks, and I would go out and get a case of Corona beer specifically, and make a toast to stupidity in terms of policy making and that sort of thing, because this has been, more and more ridiculous. I think the policy measures, I could have had a serious discussion, but because most of the policy measures, and I mean most, have not been fit for purpose. So I need to understand what the actual real purpose was in the background, because it certainly wasn't to combat the actual virus. In the meantime, we're struggling as a country just to keep food on our table. So a nice Corona beer and a toast to policy stupidity.
And a final word from Michael Oliver. I know you as somebody who writes about wine had a fairly well-stocked cellar, but I know that you've also been in lockdown with a lot of thirsty co-inmates. How are you doing on the wine stock? And maybe if you're not going to rush out to the bottle store when the lockdown is lifted, when you go out for a meal, maybe, Michael, what would be your tipple of choice, your first choice?
Okay. Well, listening to all the others, I am fortunate in that we have a very well-stocked cellar at home. We're perhaps a bit thin on reds, but that's, we're certainly not going to be running out of wine in a short while. I think that what I would go, if I was going out to buy wine, spirits, etc., I would probably buy a couple of bottles of really good South African brandy, aged 12, 15-year brandy. There are a couple of things that I need to do top-ups with, like vermouth, sherry, Spanish sherry, which I absolutely adore. And yeah, I think that's probably about it. I long to go down the road to the Cheese Gourmet in Linden and buy some really nice South African cheeses. I'm missing blue cheese enormously. Good hard cheese like cheddar, I miss very much. I'm sort of happy to go out and have a meal in a restaurant, but I think, we're pretty well organized at home, and I think we eat exceptionally well. So my keenness would be more to go down to get some decent brandy, maybe a couple of bottles of whiskey, and some really good cheese.
Well, I think for me, it would have to be a few bottles of very nice wine, maybe half a dozen, and then the next day I'd get another half dozen. It's something I do miss at the moment. Anyway, I really do want to thank everybody for all your time and effort. I know I've intruded into your leisure hours, but I suppose as we're all locked down at the moment, we can't really go everywhere we would like. I hope it wasn't too much of an indulgence. So many thanks to Dwayne Newman, to Jeff Osborne, to Michael Oliver, to everyone, to our two economists, Chris Hart and Mike Schussler, and of course to Malcolm MacDonald, who has helped us not just with his radical and unpalatable views on all of this, but also with the technical side of this recording. So from me, John Fraser, thanks for joining us on ZA Confidential. I hope you like this new format. Maybe we'll use it again. Who knows? Let's hope that by the time you watch this bloody lockdown is over. Cheers.
Thank you, John.